Okay, we'll make a start. Welcome everyone to the Audit Committee this evening. Before we get into the agenda, Andrew, could you your usual introduction of who's joining us this evening, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So if I start with colleagues online, so from our external auditors, KPMG, we've got Ed Mills, and we've got Graham Cadle, who's our Service Director for Finance. And then just in terms of officers in the room, Paul Ocean-Ellis, who's our Governance and Risk Manager, Madeleine Shopland from Democratic Services, Susan Parsonage to my left, the Council's Chief Executive, and I'm Andrew Moulton, the Service Director for Governance.
Thank you very much. Andrew, do you have any apologies this evening?
Councillor Srinivasan is going to be a bit late.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the minutes, were we all happy with the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record? Can I have a show of hands? Thank you very much. And the action list has been, an updated version has been circulated to members. Does anyone have any comments on the action list or any questions about that? No? Okay, thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. And do we have any questions at all from anyone? No? All right, thank you. So let's get into the main agenda then. The first item we have is the KPMG Value for Money report. So a reminder to members, this is an assessment of the Council's arrangements to secure value for money as opposed to an opinion on whether the Council does actually achieve value for money. So just to preface that, but I'll hand over to KPMG to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've stolen my introduction, actually, because I was going to remind everyone that, well, firstly, this is our risk assessment and not our final conclusion. That was my first reminder. We will be bringing our conclusion at the end of the audit. That goes into our annual auditor's report, which you'll remember from last year. So there will be an additional document that comes to you that has our value for money conclusion. This is our risk assessment piece where we're looking initially through a very large amount of documents to check whether we've identified anything that we think is likely to or could result in a significant weakness and might result in us needing to do additional work over that particular area. We are also open to the committee for anything that they feel should be something that should be something we should be looking into in any particular detail. But as our risk assessment stands, which is an iterative process, we haven't identified any risks of significant weakness at this stage across the three areas of our value for money opinion, which is financial sustainability, governance, and the 3 E's, as we call it, improving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. The reasons behind that are detailed quite heavily in the reports in front of you, so I won't go into a great deal of detail, as I will presume that it's been read and already gone through it in that level of detail. But just to briefly go over the summary of those, the financial sustainability, the reasons that we decided there wasn't a risk of significant weakness at this point is that primarily the Council came in roughly where they expected to on budget, and given the national pressures that exist across the sector and the size of the organisation, that suggests that the arrangements in place are likely to be not including significant weaknesses. If we look at the governance area, there's not been any significant changes in the governance at the Council since the prior year, where we judged that to be not having any significant weaknesses. Everything appears to be operating the same and effectively as before, and obviously we will be looking to review the regulators' reports in more detail as the year progresses. And in the 3 E's, as I mentioned earlier, we seem to be delivering savings, and the benchmarking that Wokingham has compared to other councils of similar size is relatively complementary and in a good position, looking at SIP for benchmarking and other factors. So as a headline, the risk assessment hasn't identified anything to us that may be a significant weakness, although we will be bringing our final report at the end of the year, and we will be going into more detail as we go through the year. That's all I was going to say on this report, but obviously very much happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ed. Any questions or comments? Right, Rob and then Stephen, please.
It's probably a typo, I suspect, but if you say that there's no assessment of any significant risk, on the 3 E's, your risk assessment conclusion says that you have identified a risk of significant weakness. Is that just a typo?
That would therefore be a typo.
Which page is that?
We can have that corrected.
Maybe I'm misreading this. On page 11, it says, based on risk assessment procedures, we have identified a risk of significant weakness associated with...
It should say we have not identified.
That would make more sense, right?
Good spot, Rob. Well done. Thank you. And Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I mean, I read it with great interest and I was pleased with what I was reading. But there's always the cynical side to me that wonders whether, as we're still early on in the process, should we or could we have expected you to find stuff? So what my question is about is, are other councils that you're providing a similar report to seeing something different, or is this just a vanilla report that everybody gets at this stage because you're not yet providing your annual report? So therefore we're taking sort of modesty, thinking this is great, when actually everybody's reading the same at this point in the year, and therefore we shouldn't be taking too much credence and we should be waiting for the final report. That was my first point, first question, if I may. And the second question was that things are still relatively new. We've had reports from you before saying that the working relationship with officers has been extremely positive since you started. And I just wondered if that is still the situation, or whether that was a sort of a honeymoon period, and whether things have changed at all, or whether you still feel that's going in a very positive way. Thank you.
To take your first question, no, it's not just a standard vanilla report at all. You are welcome to look into other councils' minutes and you'll find reports, even from myself, indeed, that do have risks of significant weakness in there at this stage. So it isn't the case that it's a basic report that goes to everyone and has the same outcomes in terms of the risk of significant weaknesses. There are councils even in the local area that do have those risks in there. So hopefully that answers your first question. On the second point, no, so far, if we're in the honeymoon period, we're still in that for now. We have a very constructive relationship with officers to date, and that has continued in the current year's audit. Very constructive and working towards the outcomes that we have, which is obviously to move back into normal audit opinions as soon as possible.
Thank you. I was hoping that would be what I would hear, so that's very, very pleasing. So all I'd like to say then is well done to everybody concerned, because I think that's a really good achievement. And as you've pointed out, not all audit committees are maybe receiving something quite as healthy as this. So just thanks to all of the officers and the team at KPMG for the part they're playing in getting this to such a good position, and also for the work you've done in that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions yet? Mike?
Not really a question. I just think it's a very encouraging report, actually. I like that minuted. Particularly on the summary of risk assessment on page 7, where we look at reserves, and I know the officers and councillors have been concerned about the reserves looking forward in the medium-term plan. But that's very encouraging, seeing that statement there in the papers. So I echo what Stephen said. Thank you very much to the officers concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And Sam?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I just want to echo that as well. Yeah, I thought it was a really positive report, very detailed. I think my question was really around, as part of the value for money report, would you also look at now or in the future the procurement or commissioning risks? And if you have, were there any procurement or commissioning risks that may be identified, particularly for high value contracts?
We will be looking at that as part of our final conclusion, yes. We haven't looked into that in a huge amount of detail as part of our risk assessment process, but certainly if there's anything large on the horizon, we will be looking into that.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from anyone? No, okay, I think we'll move on. That's a positive start to the meeting, so thank you for that. The next item is the annual governance statement. Is this you, Paul? Or it's Susan? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So you have a copy of the annual governance statement in front of you. I'm not going to go through all of the statement, but within the report it does highlight the improvements or the actions to improve on page 9 of the report itself. I think the actual statement itself. So that gives you an indication of the different things that we've taken action on in 24-25, such as completing the council plan, the community's vision, and the people strategy. And so that and the partnership toolkit, we've talked about the statement of accounts before, and then of course the important work that this audit committee does as well. So there's quite a few actions in there. Again, I'm not going to talk about that. Oh, maybe I will. There's something that I wanted to mention, is the fact that we've got a number of improvement boards under the report into CLT. So that part of that is about getting assurance that improvement is taking place in particular areas. So we've got one for housing that's just been introduced. We've got one for children's services and another for adult services as well. So I think that for me is really helpful to ensure we've got the finger on the pulse and, as I say, provides that assurance to us as CLT. And then we've got the statutory officers group, which is myself, Andrew, and the Section 151 officer. We meet on a regular basis. It's like a formal, it's a formal meeting that takes place, as I say, on a regular basis. At the same time, we bring in other statutory officers as well, such as the DAS and the DCS, periodically to ensure that we're covering any issues that
Sorry to
they may
interrupt
have.
you. Could you spell out the acronyms for
Sorry,
people that may not know what
apologise. It's the Director of Adult Services and the Director of Children's Services as well. So because they've had those statutory responsibility around children and adults. So those particular parts of the report give you an example of the different things that we've put in place. There are the risks that I've mentioned, and of course I come to this meeting to talk to you about the risks, and those risks remain around the budget. SEND, it remains a risk. I went to the LGA conference in early July. I was invited to speak about SEND and the challenges around SEND, and I was speaking alongside the Minister for Schools. So I think, Wokingham got a good profile there, and talking about the issues and challenges that we face around our deficit and the changes that need to be in the white paper that's forthcoming in the autumn. So we're really sort of like trying to raise this as high as we possibly can. So another risk is the adult social care sort of market. Again, that continues to be a risk. There's real pressures on that in terms of what we need to pay for the different services to ensure that vulnerable adults have the services that they need. And then, of course, the cyber risk. So those really are four key risks that I've spoken to you about before. And then, of course, the report itself moves on to what we think the assessment is against the different criteria. So it goes through the good governance, and again, I'm not going to go through each of the principles, but happy to take questions on that, really.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. So there's a lot here for members to look through. Just a reminder, so we're asked to review it and consider whether it reflects the risk environment and supporting assurances, and to consider whether the evaluation fairly concludes that the arrangements are fit for purpose. So do members have questions or comments on all of that? So start with Martijn.
I was comparing it a bit with last year, and I noticed I came up with maybe two changes. There's significant transformational changes in children and adult services happening simultaneously. And I was wondering, how can we prevent potential conflict between these transformations through governance and control mechanisms? And I was more looking at, is this a potential risk that we should be aware of or not?
It's a risk in the sense of the support to deliver the change. That's where the risk lies. It's important that we make the change. The good thing is, structurally, we've got the exec director who covers children's and adults, and there was a reason why that new role was introduced a couple of years ago, and it was to have that strategic overview of the two areas. And there are opportunities to align things in the different areas, but whilst retaining the speciality of obviously adults and children's that needs to be retained. So there's that strategic overview. At the same time, in terms of that point about support, the change programmes are reported into CLT. So we have because these things are really important, you know, the action is important, the delivery is important, that gets, as I say, reported into the corporate leadership team.
I have one more question. And the other change I thought was like the partnership working is increasing.
Yes.
And how does the partnership framework and also the new partner toolkit help the staff with maybe early detection of non-compliance to the framework? Also maybe from the partners.
So in terms of, it's really interesting about partnership, because I think you develop partnership by doing partnership. For me, it's really important to get things done, and that's how you get really good relationships, and you know, you work out some of your differences and then how you can work together really well. I think what the partnership toolkit does, it just puts a bit of a framework around it, because it helps when things don't go quite as well as they could do. So I think that's the important point with the framework, and particularly around you know, thinking about that we have assets across the borough which different partners use, and it's important that whatever we do, we actually do so in a fair and transparent way.
Other questions or comments? Okay, Christine first.
Thank you. I thought it was a very thorough report, very interesting. The first one I've read, so you have to excuse me if what I ask is a bit... I suppose my feeling was, do we feel that we're being self-critical enough in the report? And I suppose the other thing I linked on for that is whether there had been engagement with stakeholders when assessing our governance performance.
So in terms of how we assess ourselves, we do look at how others assess different parts of the organisation. So that's a way of understanding what others think about, you know, how we perform. I would say that in terms of our, say for example, our partnership with the community and voluntary sector, and also users with people who have a lived experience of different issues, for example, in adult services. We're doing a lot more co-production, so we get a lot more feedback. So the different strategies that I've mentioned that we have in here, we are actually co-producing more than we've ever done. So I would say we don't necessarily do a critique externally on the specific document itself, but there's lots of critique that's taking place in different ways for different elements. So, for example, around finance, as I say, and SIPFA, it's also around, as I say, the feedback through co-production, which is really important. So Paul might have a different sort of a view as well as, obviously you pull together quite, the document working across the organisation.
So I don't know if it'll be helpful or not, Christine, if I just briefly explain how we produce the document. So we ask every service director to complete what we call a management assurance statement, covering the principles and compliance with the local code of corporate governance, which sets out how we achieve the principles. And through that process, they identify areas where we've made improvements during the year, or any areas that they think that need to be developed. Reviewing those, we pull together, and we've got a governance group of officers who then review those and then make recommendations to CLT on how they produce the report. So within that process, there's a level of challenge amongst the governance group members, but also with the service directors being challenged by directors, and then CLT corporately challenging themselves and each other, whether we've got the assessment in the right place.
Yeah, that was helpful in terms of, because I was thinking more externally, but that was really helpful that Paul then outlined the internal sort of like the processes that we have, that sometimes because you're doing it, sort of don't always think of that as being a way of a critique, if you like.
And Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. I was coming from a similar position, really, because this feels to me like it's one of the more weighty reports that we receive as an audit committee, and it's got a lot of importance attached to it, and it covers a huge amount of what the council does, obviously, and it's not just about delivery, but as you say, it's also about partnerships, it's about transformation. It covers a huge amount. And it feels a bit rubbish to me that we just sort of, because we haven't got any questions, there's nothing really being highlighted as issues, that we just sort of like, well, no issues, and we just put it in the filing cabinet. That felt a bit rubbish. But my question really was following on from what you were saying in terms of, if you look at pages 35 of the pack onwards, it's 13 in the report, but 35 onwards. And I think Paul may have covered this in terms of, I was just interested in terms of, if I was writing my own performance review at work, I'd probably put myself down as outstanding or something. And so I just want to make sure there was enough sort of independent rigour. And I think from what Paul was saying, it's kicked around a bit and it's looked at from various directions. So I as a director couldn't just put down I've been brilliant and that without being challenged on it. And that's what I wanted to sort of check up on a bit. And I think Paul's answered that, because it's great to see that things are very effective. That is really encouraging. But it's also, we want to make sure that that actually is correct and that's a fair assessment. So so thank you, Paul, for that explanation, because that helped me a lot. But so I'm waffling, I know that, but it's just basically, so well done to everybody for this. Is a huge achievement, and to achieve such a good results. And I think that's at least the second year running I've seen this sort of very effective outcomes. It's a real credit to the team, because you're not in control of demand in most of these key core services, for children and adult services particularly. You've got some degree of control over the budget, but you haven't really got control over what comes in from government, shall we say, and how much support we get. So to actually achieve good outcomes whilst up against very tight cost constraints and without a control over the demand is a very significant thing. Again, I suspect there might be audit committees across the country who are looking at quite a different report when they have their meetings. So well done to everybody. Good,
thank you. And I think I wanted to flag, I'm going back to your point about the what's in here. So to give you an example of where some of the changes have come from, where we've had external review. So, for example, the statutory meeting that I mentioned, where we come together, the three of us, and then bring in the children's director and the adults director, that came from a peer review. So so we get others to review. So that particular action was as a result of the peer review making that recommendation, and for the council. And we will be having another peer review in the future. So it's we will continue to seek that external review as well.
Okay, Rob, and then Mike.
I'll just take a quick moment actually to echo something of what Stephen says. I also thought the report was really good. And I think recently the stuff that I've read gives me a lot of comfort in a belief and a knowledge that the work that the officers are doing is really, really good. So, yeah,
Thank you.
I'd add that. Onto a more detailed thing, I was looking at the issues particularly with stakeholder engagement, which got my interest. And I know we're doing stakeholder engagement across a number of areas, including across our residents. I'm just curious as to how effective that is. So, for example, if we look at the issues of stakeholder engagement on talking about the potential settings of budgets, how many actual responses do we ever get from them? Is it significant, or is it merely we say we're doing it and we don't really get much of a response? And one of the things that made me think about that was when I looked in the report on Appendix 1, Principle B, it talks about we've established a range of communications with stakeholders, and our newsletters have nearly 300,000 subscribers. which is interesting considering I think we've only got 180,000 residents. So I wonder if we're fooling ourselves slightly with our numbers.
Okay, so it's an interesting number of points there. In terms of subscribers, I think you can have people that have lived in Wokingham, that have moved out, that are still on the list. And I speak as somebody that used to live in Reading quite a few years ago and is still getting a newsletter from Reading, but it helps because I get a good overview. So it can well be that there's 300,000, but at the same time we do get feedback that it covers a lot of sort of detail and helpful information. I know, Paul, if you're going to come in there, because I saw you were going to go to your...
That's across, I might be incorrect, but we've got something like in the order of 15 or 16 different newsletters that go across the point piece. So that's the total number of subscribers across all those newsletters. So somebody may have subscribed to all 15 or 16 and therefore be counted 16 times. They're not unique subscribers.
Sorry, I think that might therefore be, if you like, somewhat misleading, because I thought that was probably the case. But what we really need to know is how many people are talking to us, I think, if we're talking about engagement, then, because we have, roughly 120,000 adults maybe. So I think the question of 300, I'm sure we do get a number from outside, and I suspect the majority of those are multiple, people subscribing to multiple. But if it was possible to identify how many people, how many of our residents actually engage, that would be, I think, more interesting than the fact that one guy does all 15, if you follow my meaning.
Yeah, try and just come in. I know Paul wants to come in as well. I think I'm sort of like in my head, sort of thinking about what you're saying there, and thinking, we've got communication, we've got engagement, and we've got co-production, and there are different ways of how we sort of engage. So if we so I mentioned co-production, we've got social care future, people with lived experience of physical and learning disability, and that's really sort of deep engagement and co-production. The volume of people will be hundreds as opposed to thousands, but it's about the quality of that. And then there's the engagement. So you mentioned and asked about budget. I know that we did some engagement on the budget as in a survey, and I can't remember the number, but I was assured that the number was higher than other councils where they've done a similar type of engagement. However, there's always more that we can do, and think about what is a quality engagement, or a meaningful engagement in terms of a budget. But Paul, you might want to come in on something, because Paul's got some great
Graham's got his hand up as well online. Perhaps Paul first and then
Graham. Yeah,
Graham and then Paul.
Graham will come in better on the budget than me.
Thank you. Yes, so just to the budget engagement this year is being done over two phases. There was an initial phase that was done about a month or two ago around more principles and a higher level, and through the communications team we've tried different approaches, because this is historically difficult stuff to do and to get people interested. So the first stage, we got about 1,300 online responses. We also took out, both myself and Graham Ebers went to some face-to-face sessions, both with community groups and the third sector and local organisations, where we literally discussed, we took them through slides. So it is hard to get a big number, but actually hopefully that shows that some of the approaches we're taking forward are doing really well, doing better than maybe other authorities, and is a balance of some online basic numbers and responses, as well as some detailed dialogue where we can really sort of bring it to life and get underneath the skin of it. So hopefully it gives a bit of comfort of the approach we're taking.
Yeah, far better answer than I gave, and
Did you want to add anything else? You're okay. All right. Is that all right, Rob? Yeah. Okay. And then Mike.
Thank you. Echo some of the other comments about a very good report covering lots of matters. I sort of three things. First one, very pernickety, I'm afraid, as forgot to know me. On page 32, we talk about financial statements in the first bullet point. In the last sentence, we talk about the 24-25 accounts able to receive an unqualified audit report. I think at the last meeting, KPMG said they would again be qualified, I'm afraid, due to brought forward figures in the comparatives and allocations within reserves.
Yeah, I was going to raise the same thing, Mike. I think we just need to tweak that word.
We do, because it's not factually right, is it?
Yeah, I agree.
And actually in the introductory paragraph, we talk about significant change that will require consideration and action appropriate in 24-25. It's probably, I would have thought it should be 25-26. We're in 25-26 now, aren't we? Well into it, unfortunately. Anyway, pedantic points, as I say. The second point I had, first one was on page 36, where we talk about the local government ombudsman, can never pronounce that word, upheld 13 findings against the council. And I wondered, like other numbers we give, I'm afraid my ignorance, I don't know if that's high, low, compared to other unitary authorities. So I think for a reader, it's very useful to put that in context. And there's a similar point on page 39, where we talk about, I think, a staff engagement survey, and we talk about engagement rate of 65%. To be honest, I don't know if that's good or bad. Is 80 good? Is 40 good? My gut feel that's probably quite good, but I don't know. And there's no comparison, again, with other organisations.
You're absolutely right, because it is really high, that response rate.
Yeah, so we should probably should blow our trumpet and compare to other people. The final point I had was on page 42. It really picks up probably something Stephen was saying. So this is covered points with good practice, with reporting, audit, etc., etc. And I just wondered whether we challenged ourselves, whether it should be generally effective rather than completely effective, given our known issues we've had with completing annual accounts on time and their qualified audit opinions. I'm not saying it should be one or the other, but what processes did we take really to push ourselves? Is this the right rating?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that, because I was going to say the same. Should it be generally effective, especially as we've still got the Ofsted in there as well. I know that was sort of March 23.
Was it generally effective last year? We might well have discussed it similar time last year. This can't remember then.
We did discuss it last year. I lost the vote.
Oh, did you?
Yes. So I didn't want to raise it.
I don't get a vote, so I'm happy to raise it.
Did you have any thoughts, Susan, about the
I think I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, about the audits, and because for me, it comes back to the fact that there was backlog of audits. The government put in place a backstop, and then the auditors did not have the time to look at the evidence they needed to.
Yeah.
And we don't have a history of getting disclaimed accounts. That's not. So it was something that we did not have control of. So that, I guess, is where I'm sort of like coming from.
Yes. Well, I think I'm not saying it should be one or the other. It's whether the organisation has challenged itself. So you're giving some of the arguments why you're happy for it to be effective and minuted accordingly. So.
Do you want to come in, Paul? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, just to clarify on last year's annual government statement, you're correct, you did have the discussion, and this element was considered effective, and so for consistency, we've gone with effective this time as last time it was effective.
And I think for me it's the signal. We've had a value for money report, BFM report, just before this one today, we don't have a history of disclaimed opinions. If there was something that was telling us that there's a problem here, then I could sort of see, but it's I'm looking in the round, and that's sort of my sort of take on it is that it's effective because we will get to a position where we won't be in the position we're in now. I'm very confident about that.
Yeah, I think financial reporting is a very much separate skill set to a lot of the skill sets councils will have in finance, with value for money reporting, with just a different way of doing things. It's a different mindset, and I think we have been quite slow in producing accounts, and we've discussed a number of times around the table. It hasn't just been a matter of auditors not putting the resource in, and I think you were very kind the way you described the previous auditors then. I think it's getting the skill set to produce accurate information on time, and that's the point we've been hammering, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years. But I think it's recognised, and Graham and his team have put a lot more effort in recently, and I'm sure this year's accounts will be at a different quality standard than they have been in the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Andrew, sorry.
Just a couple of general points, Chair. So the first one is just traditionally you've received a further report later in the year in terms of progress against the actions, and I'm assuming that would be helpful for the committee, again, to get that assurance as we go through the year, so we could build that into the forward plan. I guess the other point just to make, it's in the report, but just to be clear that this doesn't sit in isolation, it sits with the set of financial statements. So again, when you come to look at the financial statements later in the year, you will do that in the context of understanding that this is part of that. It isn't just the numbers, it's the narrative around governance.
Thank you. I just had a few very brief points myself. On page 29, paragraph 2.14, it just needs finishing off that paragraph. It finishes with an "and" at the moment, so it just needs to be finished. So I can be pernickety too, Mike, not just you. So, yeah, that we talked about. Yeah, and similarly, page 32, one of those paragraphs is all in. The budget engagement paragraph is all in italics, which makes it looks like it's going to change, but presuming that's just a sort of typo. Page 32 again, we're just picking up on the partnering point that we spoke about earlier. Is it worth mentioning in there that Audit Committee will be reviewing the partnership framework? I think that would be good to add that in, because I know we've got that sort of coming up at some point. Page 33, where we talk about councillor development, we might want to reference in there that the work that we're doing to use the LGA resources in terms of the LGA member development charter. We could reference that at least. Yeah, that was all my points actually. Did anyone else have any other comments or questions on that? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on then to the SIRO annual report, which is Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to briefly introduce this. So Senior Information Risk Officer report, that's me, I'm the SIRO. So looking forward to all the questions that you'll have for me on this report. So this is on, the covering report is from page 63, the report itself is from page 67. So the recommendation is that the Audit Committee discusses and notes the content of the report. Just to give you a bit of context, this is the third annual report that the Audit Committee has received. So we're getting into a rhythm of producing this report and hopefully over time as well improving the content and the things that get reported through this report. It's not a statutory requirement, but it is good practice to produce these types of reports. So it gives you information about how the council is addressing both the risks around cybersecurity and the risk around information governance, and it also gives you information about performance, particularly in the areas of information governance. So you'll be aware from the report that you had on the corporate risk register at the June meeting, those two risks feature prominently. The cyber risk is as we classify, very high. The information governance risk is somewhat lower, but it's still a medium corporate risk. So this is obviously a public report, so the focus tonight is particularly on the information governance risk itself. But there is, as you requested at the last meeting, there is a private briefing arranged for the committee to talk in a much more detail and have a bit of a deep dive into the cyber risk and the arrangements that the council has put in place to address that. So just in terms of what does it mean to be a SARO? Well, really it's about having overall responsibility for that information governance risk, but looking at how that risk might impact the strategic priorities of the council. So really sort of trying to bring it alive in terms of how information governance may impact the council not achieving its most important priorities. But it isn't just the SARO, there's a whole team of people that are referenced in the report in section 2 who contribute to good information governance. And of course this committee as well is an important part of that system in terms of challenging and seeking assurance on all things information governance. And also, I should mention as well, the internal audit team regularly look at the area as well and present recommendations and suggestions for improvement to me as part of their process. So in terms of sort of some key headlines in that report around performance, we've got 2 what we call corporate key performance indicators in the information governance space. These get reported quarterly to the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The first one is around performance on Freedom of Information Act requests. We have a target of achieving 90% of those within the timescales. For last year, we achieved 90.8%, and you can see on the table at the top of page 70, it shows an improving performance if you look back over the last sort of 3 or 4 years in terms of how the council is managing those requests. The second key performance indicator that we have is around reportable breaches to the Information Commissioner's Office. And during the last year, we had no reportable breaches. You'll see, which is obviously good news. You'll see in the report, though, there's lots of what I might classify sort of near misses, ones where we had some issues and incidents. And I think I said this to the committee last year. We very much encourage a sort of open reporting process for staff. So we want to find out what the issues might be in terms of why things nearly went wrong or why they did go wrong, but they weren't of that significance to be reported to the ICO. And that's really useful intelligence in terms of developing our training courses, trying to close any gaps that those incidents might show to us. The other metric that I just wanted to highlight in the report, and this is perhaps less good news, but it's an area that is our key focus for 25-26, is the council's performance in terms of addressing subject access requests. So you'll see on page 78, it's the table at the top of that our performance isn't where it needs to be on that. We're performing at 60% at the moment, which to be frank isn't good enough. So we've got a explicit improvement program in place in that area to create a central team, to put more resource into that team, to use technology to help us respond to those subject access requests much more quickly and in accordance with the performance requirements that we have. So if I just end by saying sort of for me, the sort of key things for this next year are, as I've just said, improving that subject access request performance, making sure that the points that are pointed out by Catherine's internal audit team are addressed, and we're well on the way of addressing those issues. There's items around policies and making sure our policies are up to date. So, for example, the acceptable use policy that we promote to staff and staff are required to comply with, and all new starters have to sign up to that. That's very recently been updated, and we train staff in that as well, and all staff are required to complete mandatory training every 2 years in that area. So that's really important. And then the final thing I just wanted to say is around artificial intelligence, AI. So we've just introduced a governance policy about how the council is going to use AI, because obviously it's a very fast-moving world. There's lots of different versions of AI. We want to make sure that we've got strong governance around how that gets used by the council. I'll just give you one example of what I mean by that. In our legal team, there's a real opportunity, I think, to use AI, but it needs to be done in a sort of well-governed, well-controlled way. What we don't want to do is somebody to put a question into Copilot and it comes up with poor legal advice. That obviously wouldn't be good for anyone. So in particular disciplines, we're looking to work with vendors who can give us those sort of guarantees in terms of the quality of the information that AI would produce for us. So that was a slightly longer perhaps than I thought, Chair, but just a sort of introduction to what's in that report, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I just pick up a couple of things that you said? I think it's probably worth mentioning in the report about Audit Committee having the cyber briefing, just to show that we're actively trying to monitor the management of that risk. You've probably got that into section 5 somewhere. And then you mentioned the number, so I'm looking at page 74, you mentioned the number of data breaches, and obviously it's good that there have been no sort of high risk ones. Yeah. But the low risk ones have almost doubled in the year. So how do you assess whether that is just because people are getting better and better at reporting, as opposed to actually the organisation is getting worse, and that's why the data breaches are increasing? How do you assess that?
Well, my assessment would be that it is predominantly because we're actively encouraging reporting, and we quite regularly sort of put information out to staff to encourage that and remind them of the importance of that. I think it's a fair challenge, though, in terms of am I misleading myself there with that comment? So I will take that away and talk to the people in the team in terms of any particular patterns, trends in those low-risk ones in particular, given the increase.
Thank you. Right, who has questions or comments on this? Christine, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Again, very good report, thank you, very thorough. Just going back to what you were talking about, the increase in the low risk of data breaches, and I note that you'll say that you're going to be introducing a sort of monitoring method so that you have more information about the type of data breaches. And I was wondering, on the increase there, is there a specific theme that comes through as to what's actually being increased in terms of the breaches?
I haven't got anything specific that I can share with the committee this evening, but I will take that away as an explicit action and provide some more information around that particular point.
Then the other one, I also thought it might be quite useful to include data around the completion rates for mandatory training for cyber risk and data protection, because that's usually quite a good indicator of the thoroughness of training, etc.
Yeah, that mandatory training, we do monitor that really closely, and that information is sort of shared widely across the council, certainly with the directors. We are into the 90% with compliance. I always look for at least 95%. The reason it's never going to be 100% is because on the list we've got people who have left, or they're off on long-term sick, or whatever it might be. But we're in a good position in terms of the completion of that training.
Great, thanks. I just thought it might be worth including in the report as it is so good. And then the last sort of thing was, are staff actually sort of surveyed or evaluated on their information risk awareness?
No is the short answer to that, although Paul's looking at me as if that might be the incorrect answer. Go on, Paul.
Sorry, but I think it's part of the e-learning package that they have to do every 2 years. There is a test that they have to pass in order to complete the training. So I would contend that that is an evaluation of their knowledge and skills around information governance.
Yeah, I'm not sure was that what you meant by the question?
probably not quite. I mean, I think it is a difficult thing to judge, but I think in my mind 2 years is quite a long gap between, especially where it comes to cyber and the risks involved in that. It just seems like, 2 years is quite a long time for staff to not have some sort of awareness brought to them.
What I would say, and I think Paul's probably going to say the same thing, is that there are very regular updates to staff around, for example, I can remember within the last few days, a reminder to us all around taking care with emails, and if we don't know who the sender is and that sort of thing. So that regular awareness raising is taking place sort of all the time during that sort of two-year period. I think it's fair to say, though, that particularly in the current climate, no organisation can ever do enough training and awareness for its staff. There's obviously some very sort of topical examples out there at the moment, particularly in sort of supermarket industry, that have been very severely affected by cyber attacks. But I'm sure when you get your more detailed briefing in September, that you'll be able to sort of dive into that further and hopefully suggest areas that we could improve even further on.
Rob.
I've got two questions, one of them being pernickety, I'm afraid. In section 6.1 or 6.1.5, it says that we had an 81% increase in Schedule 2 requests. I appreciate that we've got no control over that. That's requests that come into us. But I don't know, is that a big deal? Or is it the fact that it's increased because it's still only to 212? Is that a significant use of time? Or is that simply, we just note that, but it's not hugely relevant? And my second one on the pernickety bit is in your table where we're talking about the various requests received and how many answered on time. There's some notes below that says that these figures differ or might differ from the website as we've done some work. If we think these numbers are correct, why doesn't somebody update the website with these numbers? So either the website had better numbers or this has better numbers. Surely they should both be the best numbers we've got.
If I take the second question, I think it's really just a timing difference in terms of sort of the information that goes on the website is reported in a slightly different way with different time periods to what's in this report. But I think it's a fair challenge because it doesn't help in terms of clarity to have different time periods. I think that the first point about volumes increasing, yeah, clearly there's a cost to the council, the more requests that come in. We do what we can do to, if we're talking about freedom of information requests, we do what we can do to make sure that what we call our publication scheme is up to date. So if it's a question that's previously been asked by a member of the public, we'll publicise that on our website. So, and if we get the same request again, we'll signpost people back to the information that's already out there. But you're right, there's only a limited extent of things that we can do to manage that demand. And I'm sure I said it here in the past, but certainly since 2018, the public have become much more aware of their rights in terms of data, and that certainly generated a massive sort of spike at the time, which we've, over that sort of last 7 years, we've been successful and unsuccessful at different times in terms of trying to manage that demand.
I completely accept that, but I think my question was a little bit more specific, because it's specifically to the Schedule 2 requests, which come in from the police and places like that. Or are they just the same as any other freedom of information request, or is that a bigger... I don't really know what a Schedule 2 request from the police and similar services is, so I don't know whether that's a big thing or a small thing. If it's just a standard sort of request for information, but in this case coming from the police, then I won't worry about it at all. But if it's anything more significant, I guess that's what I was really asking.
Yeah, again, happy to sort of take that away and come back with a fuller answer on that particular point, but I think it is very much sort of out of our hands. We're reliant on what information comes over the threshold.
Okay, and Vishal and then Stephen.
I just had a question regarding the data breaches. What is the differentiator between like a low, medium data breach and a low data breach? If you have any examples, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'm trying to think of a good sort of useful example, because there's a degree of subjectivity around this in terms of whether they get evaluated as low or medium, and it's slightly academic, I would say, as well, in terms of where that demarcation happens. But a low one could be where information was potentially disclosed to a third party, but it didn't actually occur. So it's like a near miss. It's perhaps not the best example there, whereas a more significant one would be where perhaps the information was disclosed, but it was a single piece of data. The council was able to retrieve it, so the subject wasn't harmed in any way in terms of that disclosure. So that wouldn't be reportable to the ICO, although even with that example, we would have an informal conversation with the ICO in terms of their opinion as to whether a breach had taken place. But if the information is retrieved and there's no harm, we'd log that in those sort of near misses, but it wouldn't be that reportable breach.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. As has been said, I thought it was a very good report, so thank you for that. I'm going to take a slightly different position on it, I think, in terms of we've acknowledged that you're not really in control of the demand for this, so you're trying to respond to that, and that can be tricky because you don't know what level of demand you're going to get, and also the complexity of it can be quite different. So I think what I've really taken from this, and you mentioned it, Andrew, was there's been an ongoing issue in a retailer. We've heard recently about a significant leak that impacted overseas people and our own nationals, and that was hidden behind injunctions. I know the current government have done all they can to sort of make that more known and resolve the issues. So for me, what's really significant about this is the two things I think you mentioned around the culture, that having a cultural position where people are aware and then they actually proactively notify things because they're not worried and scared of the consequences is really, really important, because if you don't have that, you won't know. And I think that is really significant. I think it also needs the ongoing, as has been said and highlighted, and Paul's addressed and you've addressed it, in terms of just continual awareness for staff, because at the end of the day, nearly everything you deal with is personal data as a council, inevitably. So you're more high risk than most organisations, and you recognise that. And I think the third thing that's really the necessary defence in this is having a good team at the top that's overseeing this and has got that right amount of dedication and commitment to it, understanding and sense in terms of how they respond. So if there was no point in developing a culture where come forward and declare, and then they get so stuffed with the outcome of that nobody will ever say anything again. So you need all of those things in balance, really, in terms of the culture, the awareness and the management position. And from what I was reading in here, it seemed to me that we can be as confident as we can be that those things are in a good position. So it's a well done to everybody involved in that, and thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Mike, and then Sam.
Most of my comments have already been mentioned, but I did wonder on the data request where we've dipped our response rate to 60%, what the consequences are for that. And the other overriding thing I felt when I read through, every sort of request, whether it's instances of data breaches, whether it's electoral royal services, request to them, whether it's the Schedule 2 sort of type with the Thames Valley Police, everything is up everywhere, and whether you have the resource to actually deal with this. So sort of two questions, but possibly connected.
Okay, so in terms of consequences, so organisations, if they have a pattern of not performing in subject access requests, freedom of information, then they can be subject to fines by the ICO. because our performance is relatively good, as I described it. We're not in that place, and again, not to sort of underestimate some of the things that we need to do in Wokingham. If you look at similar reports from other organisations, they're much poorer in terms of performance, in particular, particularly FOIs. I think it's quite unusual to find an organisation that's meeting the 90% target, which is set by the ICO themselves. But yeah, that's the risk if we don't get this right, and if we have any significant issues there. And sorry, I forgot, what was your other point, Mike?
Just generally, all the data here, everything's up on
Resources.
Requests,
yeah.
Several areas it's covered in paragraph.
Yeah, so resourcing-wise, I've been working very closely with the Director of Children's Services, because she has identified, as you can see from the report, that the subject access request performance, particularly in children's services, is certainly lower than other parts of the council. So we are creating a central team, so bringing resources together that sit within children's services into the central team, which sits within legal as part of the information governance team, and that will be supported by some additional technology. So we're putting more capacity into the service to help us improve that performance. And if I'm sitting here in 12 months with next year's annual SARO report, you can hold me to account in terms of whether that overall 60% has improved or not.
Okay, and Sam, did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought this was a really good report, actually. It, lots of detail in it. I think one of the key things you touched on was, around sort of AI use policy, so keen to track that as that changes. I think, some of the things that come to mind to me would be things like, looking at like enterprise level account, user accounts for staff, and, so it's controlled centrally, and, looking at, okay, well, are there particular like AI engines that are not usable, and maybe sort of banning people from using those, for example. So looking at some governance around that. Just another thing, I've been thinking about alongside AI is metadata. That's quite a big part of the world we live in now. So it might be good to, at some point, maybe next year, to look at is elements of that included in the report around, is there any information risk or governance around how the council keeps and processes metadata as well.
Yes, very happy to take that away, and we'll make sure we include that in next year's report.
Anything else from anyone? Yeah, Christine, go ahead.
Sorry, just one little one. On page 80, you talk about the multiple contacts from the ICO, which were in relation to the delayed SARs. I just wondered how many that is when you talk about multiple contacts, whether it's worth having the number in there, if only for comparison purposes in later years.
I haven't got the figure off the top of my head, but I'll get that and we'll include that as some data for future reports.
Okay, anything else before we move on? No. Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. So the next item we've got is the assurance report. So Paul, are you going to introduce?
Hi. So this is the Improvement in Assurance Framework report. This, at its most basic level, is an attempt to capture the key sources of assurance that the council receives so that you can see them and understand them. What we've utilised is the descriptors of what I'm classifying as the components are from the LGA Improvement in Assurance Framework. So we've utilised those and gone through each one of those and identified the system and how they interact with each other, and then try to map each of the components. So if you look at the diagram in Appendix 2, that is attempting to explain how all the components fit together and how they relate to each other. And then for each of those components in the table underneath, we go through the components, the assurance mechanism, the date that assurance was provided, the frequency, so how often that's likely to be provided, and then the outcome at the latest point. So hopefully this will provide the committee with the ability to see the whole of the assurance framework for the council, enables you to identify any gaps and then use that in your planning of your work going forward. So It'll be hopefully be useful for external audit planning, internal audit planning, any management assurance work that you will find useful, looking at external reviews and any risk management spotlights. So I think that's the primary use for the committee in how it would be useful. One little note to add on the first one, because it's staring me in the face, is the overview and scrutiny Centre for Governance and Scrutiny independent review, which was conducted in 2022. We did have a little bit of a debate about the outcome for that. What happened is that required improvement, but we've now implemented that, but I've shown it in the report as it was given at the time. So it's not a current assessment, it's the assessment at the time of the review, not where we think it is now, because that's a separate judgment. What I'm providing to you is the assurance assessment from the assurance provider when they provided it. Because we did have a discussion around that and what that actually meant. So I'm really happy to receive any feedback on this. This is the first time it's been, whether it's useful, whether there's things missing, whether there's any improvements that you might consider for the next iteration.
Okay, thanks for all the work that's gone into this. I think that particularly the table is really useful to have. At a glance, you can see all of the different areas of assurance and the ways in which we can get it. I think it's really useful. So thanks for putting all the work into it. Comments and questions from members. Christine, and then Martin.
It's probably my not knowing or understanding, but on page 91, the table at the bottom, the last line, the outcome is 5/149. I don't know what that is.
Sorry, yes, it's not. It's a shortage of space. So, Empower and the Municipal Journal produce a value for money report on local authorities. They ranked 149 local authorities, and we were 5th out of those 149.
I think a similar point on the page 93, where we talk about the CSIRO report, internal audit report, we just say level 3. So it might be worth just saying what that means. I know it's a shortage of space, and we don't want to crowd it.
Yeah, I will add some.
Kind of point,
I will add some footnotes to explain anything that's not
good.
quite as straightforward.
Okay. Anything else, Christine? Did you have anything? Anything else? No, that's fine. Martijn, next.
Just had a clarification. So we have the 3 lines of defence.
Yep.
So the list of components is that we have from the full council all the way to local authorities, or no, even further to the information commission officers. Is that our first line of defence, or are these sort of? I'm being a bit picky here because, or is the first line of defence more the internal, the peer reviews, the peer assist you do internally?
Okay, so I've based it off the model that the LGA have used, and they've used that terminology underneath for the three lines of defence. And so where something is not in the components outlined separately, I've then allocated them to first, second or third line of defence. I understand from an assurance perspective, I think what your question is getting at is some of the components that are outlined in the purple and orange sections are actually first line of defence, and some of them might be second line of defence in a technical definition. So what I've done is I've used the LGA model rather than a strict interpretation of the 3 lines of defence model.
So, but what would be then, for example, the first line of defence for us just to have an idea? Because that's more like a team assessment or a self-assessment type of things.
Yes, yeah, that would be exactly the sort of things that would be in there.
And the second line of defence would be more like an integrated assessment.
So that would be some of the things that I've listed, like health and safety, risk, the risk management, any formal self-assessments like the PSN and those. That's okay.
Any other questions or comments from members? Do we think that, I mean, I think it would be great to have this table come back sort of annually at least for us to have a look at. Do members think it would be useful to have a kind of, this is the snapshot now and another column sort of showing, you know, in a year, so we can see whether things have improved, or is that something you've considered as well? Or
I think it is. It's how we get, I guess the question for the committee is, how do you get assurance over that level? I can go and probe as an individual and say, where are we against these areas? But I think that's, it's probably as part of, would be useful in internal audit planning, or asking management directly to provide an assessment against those areas. What I'm reluctant to do is provide you with my assessment that would lead you to a false position.
I have more of a question for us, because as an audit committee, are we mainly concerned with third line of defence, or should we also look at, we also get exposure here to second line of defence, but we shouldn't maybe go as deep as first line of defence, because that doesn't, to me that doesn't make sense, because we need, if we have the second line of defence and third line of defence, we can make a good judgment. But I don't know what other people think, and or Paul, if that's what you had in mind as well.
That's what I would recommend, yeah. I agree.
any other thoughts? Okay, well, thank you very much for the work. That's really useful tool. As I say, the presentation is really effective. So thank you for the work that's gone into that. Okay, and the last substantive item we have is the lessons learned from recent auditor annual reports. Who's introducing this one?
That's me.
That's Paul as
That's
well.
me again. Hi. Yep.
This was one of my favourite bits, I must admit. Apologies to mention, but there was a very fascinating part for me as well.
I'm not sure you're allowed favourites. So this, as Grant Thornton, this is a review of Grant Thornton's report of their external audit reports that they performed, and they helpfully provided a report that included, and we've done some analysis of that. They found 4 areas of common issues around savings and transformation plans, special educational needs and disability children, financial governance issues linked to workforce issues, performance management, and procurement were those 4 areas. They helpfully provided a checklist in the report that we've gone through and done a self-assessment, which is in Appendix A. We then used the public interest reports on 3 local authorities. There's several to choose from, but we've tried to pick out ones that had unique areas. We've done a case study of those for Woking, Liverpool and Spelthorne, identified those and matched those to the 7 principles of good governance that are included in the local code of corporate governance. We've also picked those out in Appendix B and looked at how we think we're performing and whether there's any issues for concerns that are in there. I think that is all I really wanted to say. I think it's a case for you, for the committee, to be able to use it as one of those sources of assurance that we're looking at and learning from what's gone wrong in other local authorities.
Thanks very much for pulling that together. It's very useful and quite scary. Comments, questions from members? Yeah, Mike.
I just had one actually. In our assessment against the checklist items from Grant Thornton, so in Appendix A, page 101, I think it's what it's saying, the action, to me it's implying that internal audit don't receive a copy of external audits, management improvements, or what do they call them now? Or have I misinterpreted what's been written there?
No, you have. They did what They do, they just don't explicitly follow up on them. They're not tracking those. They pick them up in the course of their audit work. When they go and review an area, if there is an issue, they go and include it in the scope of the audit. But they've not got a list of what those are and go through and tick them off.
So I think that would be an improvement. Certainly in organisations I've worked in, you actually, internal audit will go and check actually that management have carried out the action points that external audit have done. And that helps management as well when they come to talk to the auditors.
I mean, I think you'd also expect the external auditors to be doing that though, wouldn't you? So I would expect when we get the sort of management letter, as it were, from KPMG, that they will look back at the previous year's recommendations and comment on. So we do get assurance from that.
From that,
so do you
but
think
I
we
think
need intel as well to look?
You could see the scenario where external audit find a material weakness. Maybe it's not followed up as quickly as it could be, or maybe internal audit are doing an audit in that area, and maybe it would be useful for them to plan the work and to carry that out and to work with management so that control weaknesses is dealt with. So
perhaps we could have an action to discuss that with Catherine to see whether that would be fixed. Yes, because you're right, it might be a year later that they review whether it's been done or not. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Martin?
I had a question. It was also from the Van Thornton account. It was about the dedicated school grants, and I actually read the report as well, because it was as I said. And it said there, more general, the sort of councils are struggling to reduce DSD deficits due to continued high demand for education and healthcare plans. And many councils with government safety valve agreements are struggling to eliminate or have the agreements to eliminate the deficits, were failing to meet their first-year targets. For us, did we see any specific changes in our financial position and service delivery since we've entered the safety valve program? And how do these align with our original expectations? Or are we also, I'm not putting maybe words here, are we as a council also struggling that even though we are as part of this safety valve program, we're still struggling because of the continued high demand of the AHCPs to reduce our...
I don't have the detail of an answer for that. I can make inquiries and come back and make sure that we, when we come back in September on the corporate risk register, I can, because it's obviously a high risk there. Yes. I will include it in the report around the corporate risk register, if that's okay.
Because he was saying, in a way, okay, we are on the safety valve program, but actually, if the safety valve program is not working, that's why it explains why we have a high risk part.
Okay. I wanted to bring up the whole issue of borrowing. I mean, one of the main ways we get assurance as a council on borrowing is the Treasury Management Strategy. I know Graham's listening because he might need to help with an answer on this. But, we have our Treasury Management Strategy. It has the sort of various limits in it and the prudential indicators, and that's reviewed at full council. And if any of the kind of thresholds are expected to be breached, then it's explained and, we're able to kind of assess the risk of that. So when I'm looking at these, I'm thinking, well, surely those are statutory reports and that those kind of reports would have been prepared in these other councils. So I suppose it leads me to kind of to challenge, well, should we be getting as much assurance from those reports as we do? I don't know if anyone can help me with that, because, why wasn't it picked up, if say the borrowing is, very sort of complex and kind of extreme, why wouldn't that have been picked up in the kind of reports that we see here at Wokingham? I don't know if Graham, you've got any. I know it's not a particularly easy question to answer.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I've looked at some of the reports, and I think it's certainly what I've seen. It's very much linked to the delivery of savings. So for a couple of the authorities, one of their problems they've had is they've bought and invested heavily in property, for instance. Now, their treasury reports look okay because they are predicting high levels of rental income and return on that investment, which will include, you know, MRP payments, as well as paying off the debt. And then the reality, be that because of COVID, the changing market, is that hasn't been achieved. And therefore, you know, very quickly they've got high debt charges. They haven't made the return on investment. Now, I genuinely don't know why that's not. If I Woking, for instance, was a big number. I don't know and haven't looked back as to why that wouldn't have been picked up earlier. I know some authorities have taken a less prudent view of MRP, for instance, which I think again can, I guess, mask or hide or not highlight some of the issues more quickly. But I guess I'd say overall, I don't have the perfect answer over a period of time. I don't want to drop Ed in it, but I don't know whether Ed has a view of why, you know, audits and things don't pick that up quicker. It's because they've put in numbers that they expect income to be achieved, and it hasn't over a period of time. And you'll see in our reports that we show those returns on investments, as well as the level of debt that we've got, and both of those indicators are in a good place. So certainly doesn't feel that we've got that risk. Clearly, if something happened in the market and we had a lot of property where the rental didn't come in, it could move quite quickly. But certainly our indicators hopefully give clarity and comfort, both of the level of risk and the return we're achieving already, that we haven't got some of the problems they face. Hopefully that's kind of answered helpful. Part of it.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. Thank you, Graham. Okay. Anyone else got any comments or questions on this one? I think it's a really useful exercise to go through and, you know, challenge ourselves on these points, isn't it? Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I thought it was a very helpful report, so well done for compiling it, particularly with the bits about what those key risks are in the checklist and stuff, and what Wokingham's doing and the positions that got in place. It strikes me as a general perspective, I don't suppose that any of the officers and councillors at these particular councils wanted to cause a problem. So it was these issues came from a good place where they started from, but it then went wrong. And I think, again, this speaks to me about the culture, being able to speak truth to power, and that being listened to. And I noticed what you acknowledged earlier, Andrew, and one of the things that was said about your report, where you said that maybe you were sort of, I can't remember the exact phrase you used, but you were going to go back and think about something again in terms of were you sort of beguiling yourself, or similar words to that, in terms of that was your thoughts, but actually you were going to go and validate it. And I think, to me, that's the really important thing about this, that you can make an assumption, and it could be based on all the evidence, but then you just go back and revalidate it, and that can be really important. And having the second tier management levels and third tiers able to voice these sort of challenges, able to voice concerns, because if you're so wrapped up in trying to deliver something and you've got the best intentions, you can just try and power through and not actually see some of the warning signs. And then that's not negligent, it's just you're so focused on trying to achieve it. So having that sort of check and balance in the system can be really important. And we see these sort of failures not just in councils but in corporates. It happens all over the place. So that kind of cultural thing, and people willing to speak out, willing to try, just check, is that really what's going on, I think is really important. And this just highlights it to me. So I thought it was really useful. I expect there'll be other incidences in the future. Hopefully it won't be that Wokingham's name appears in the list anywhere, but we will see similar from other organisations, I'm sure, because it's the nature of the beast that we're dealing with. But again, I felt it was a really good checklist, but also I felt it was really helpful to see, you know, our own acknowledgement of where we're at. So well done for producing that. And if there is updates that come out on this and new incident, please do feel free to provide updates and further reports on this, because learning and continually improving, I think, is really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah.
Just to go back on that one, because I read the report, I think it was also about the savings, a lot of the savings and transformation plans, and it recommends we should start early, avoid optimism bias, and maintain detailed record of saving forecasts delivered to allow for effective monitoring. And in some of the councils that might not have happened either because they didn't have enough, capacity or staff, and they were struggling with that one, and before you know it, it ballooned, and they're in a bad shape.
All right, thank you very much for that, Paul. Last thing to look at is the forward programme. Now, on page 109, we've only got one item for the next meeting, so do we need to sort of relook at, and then we've also got the CSIRO report in the November meeting. So do we need to relook at this?
Yeah, there's nothing that sort of springs off. Sorry. There's nothing that springs off the page in terms of bringing anything forward from November. I don't want to put Paul on the spot. I just wonder about partnership risks, whether that might be something we could bring forward.
I'd need to consult with colleagues who are going to come and present that jointly with me before committing to that, but potentially yes.
Maybe. Okay. Rob, did you want to come in?
It might be a minor thing, but this might be an appropriate moment. At the last Audit Committee meeting, we talked about spotlights and running a spotlight on specific areas for us to focus in a bit more detail. And you're going to come back with a, if you like, a model spotlight to look at, which we haven't done. It was originally going to be at this meeting, but that might be doable for the next one.
Yes, we will do.
That'll be part of the risk item, will it?
I think we'll do it as a separate
yeah.
item,
Okay.
but yeah.
Yeah, Mike.
I wonder whether you could actually drop that meeting. We're going to have an additional meeting on cyber anyway, aren't we, coming up? That corporate risk register update's also in the November agenda. So if there isn't anything, you could drop that. And it's not as if we're not meeting, we're meeting as well on the cyber.
Okay, well, perhaps Andrew and I, we could take that away and make a decision about whether it is worth meeting. Because, yeah, if there's just one item, it's not worth our time, is it? So, okay, we'll come back to the committee then on the forward programme. Yes, Martin?
I had maybe a suggestion on spotlights. I don't know. It was maybe benchmarking, because I think that comes up quite a bit. And I don't know if there's an easy spotlight, but how we benchmark against some of the other councils. I'm not sure if it is a straightforward one, but I think there's a lot of interest here for us, with some of the benchmarking part that can help us also put things in context a bit better.
Okay. Okay, unless there are any other comments or questions, we'll finish the meeting there. Thank you, everyone, for all of your contributions. Thank you.